Good morning. It is good to see you all today. If we haven't met yet, my name is John. I'm the convener here at Valley and Mountain, and I've had a little break for the last month, and I'm actually kind of nervous right now. There were some really good speakers, and it's not a competition. It's not a competition. It's not a competition. It was just really, really talented people sharing, and so I do feel the willies, so they're with me today. But what a powerful month, huh? Can we just, Dr. McKinney is here and Yasmin is here, and there was a couple other folks who were here speaking and but aren't here right now, but can we just give them a round of applause? It was a transformative month, I think, for our community, and I know for me and for a lot of people. So, so much gratitude, so much gratitude. Now on to Lord of the Rings. So, if you know me at all, that's a weird transition. I'm a huge geek for the books and the movie Lord of the Rings. It's the tale of the quest to destroy this ring, and the main character is Frodo Baggins, this little hobbit, this kind of nobody that nobody believes in, and has the great quest basically to save the world by destroying this instrument of evil. And he's got his best friend Sam with him on this journey, and they have this unlikely helper named Smeagol, or Gollum. And Gollum's job is to journey with these two unlikely heroes through the most hellacious place in the world, Mordor, to go to this fiery mountain volcano and throw in this ring, which might actually save the world. But it's a very harrowing journey to get there. And there is this moment in the movie that I feel like really encapsulates like the most difficult, the most fear-inducing, the greatest obstacle in the whole film is when they have climbed up this enormous staircase. It takes days to climb up to the top of it. And they're about to go through this tunnel in the mountains out into the land of Mordor. And the tunnel stinks of death. They get to the front of it, and it's this dark, and there's cobwebs, and they can tell that there's something sinister inside this place, and they're worried about it. And Frodo's standing at the top of the mountain, and he looks into this tunnel, and he turns to his guide, Smeagol, and he says, "Now that I'm here, I don't know if I want to go in there." And Smeagol turns back to him and says, "Go in." I'm going to try it. "Go in." And go back. It's kind of like a pirate Smeagol. Go in, or go back. Okay, thank you. Get the go in and go back. Yeah. I used to do this as a kid all the time. I was Smeagol in my house. Before the movies, we were in the book. Go in or go back. And it was this moment in the movie where he realizes that in order to get to his goal, he's got to go through something that he really doesn't want to say yes to. There's got to be this passage through the darkness, through fear, through the valley, in order to get to his goal. And I love this scene because I often feel this way in my life. There are these meetings, there are these confrontations, there are these situations, these changes that I need to make that I know are going to be painful, because change most of the time is painful. Not all the time, but a lot of the time it is painful. And I can see it coming, and as I get closer and closer, there's something inside me that starts kind of flickering, and the fear voice starts getting louder and moving up into my brain, into the ears, and into the heart, and coming up with all these excuses and all these reasons, justifications to avoid it, to stay on the other side, to not go through the tunnel. And yet, going through the tunnel is the only way to get to Mordor, go in or go home. This is a big part of like almost every great epic story. And it is part of actually of almost every big transition in the cultures around the world. So I'm going to take a little kind of teaching moment here to share some anthropology on my high-tech whiteboard. So I'm kind of a Luddite. That means I don't like technology. But I have terrible handwriting, so we'll see how this goes. In anthropology, there's this big idea called liminality. It's a big fancy word, liminality. It comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold. It's basically the place in between two rooms or in between two spaces. So it can be literally like a crossing between two doors, crossing a threshold, but it can also be a river, it can be a national border, it can be a mountain chain, it can be the edge of the ocean, it can be a desert borderland. All these places are places of liminality. They're places of change, of border between two distinct spaces. And they're kind of like, they're in the middle places. They often don't have a clear identity of their own. And so they're literal physical places, but they're also moments in time in our lives that can be liminal. And some of the early anthropologists were studying, human relationships all over the world, and they discovered this pattern happening again and again and again, that when people make a shift, that there are kind of three distinct phases, and there's three rites of passage that help people go from one place to another place in a somewhat healing way. And they describe them as three steps: separation, liminality or transition, and reintegration. And you can find just this constant pattern in a million different ways. One of the first groups of people that really helped the world figure this out was the Ndembe tribe, which is mostly in Zambia, but also in the Democratic Republic of Congo and some in Angola. And the Ndembe people worked with Victor Turner, an early anthropologist, and showed him a lot of their practices, and he was able to pick up on some of that. So they have a ritual called Mukundu, and Mukundu is the transition from boyhood to manhood, and there are three distinct phases for it. So phase one is the rite of separation. So they have a big party when they're about to go through the passage to become men. They have a big party, they drink, they sing, they dance, there's sexual freedom, and their mothers make them a meal. Isn't that nice? So party and mama's last meal. Isn't that cute? Strange. Every culture's interesting if you look close enough. So they go through that, and then they go into liminality. They go to a place called the place of death, which is the desert, the place of death. And they go out to the desert for 4 months with some older men, and they're basically hazed for 4 months. They're also circumcised, and they go through this whole process of being separated and totally disconnected from their community, and they get sort of taught what it means to be a man in their society. And it ends by getting, after those 4 months, they come back and they get body paint. They cover themselves in white paint and this beautiful artistry of the body. And they come back into society and they do a dance. And then they are washed clean and given new clothes. And they become men in the society. So there's these three distinct rituals of separation. We see this constantly, this pattern happening in the biblical stories. So we have the people of Israel in the story that Chad read today, Israel's exodus from Egypt. It begins with the Passover, is the ritual of separation, where they basically say, we are not part of this Egyptian tribe, we are out of here. A lot of gruesome details, but it is a disconnect from the empire. It is saying we are not part of this anymore. They paint blood above the doorposts of their homes. They eat this ritual meal. And so they go the Passover, and then they go through the phase of transition, which is crossing the Red Sea. I mean, it's interesting it took till the 1900s for us to figure out the pattern. We've all been doing this for basically all of time, but sometimes it's helpful to see and to name and have words to describe our experiences. So crossing the Red Sea, and then wandering in the desert is this time of liminality where they're trying to figure out who they are. And then finally reintegration is when they get to the land of milk and honey, and they set up a new society. We see this in the story of Jesus. So we're in the season of Lent right now in the Christian calendar, and the beginning of Jesus' ministry happens with these kind of three things that happen. So Jesus starts doing his thing. It begins with his baptism. So in Matthew, Mark, and Luke especially, there's this clear thing where he gets baptized, which is a ritual in some ways of separation. It's a ritual of separating yourself from the empire. You make these claims in baptism saying, I'm not going to follow the way of empire anymore. I'm following a new way. It's saying no to something else and saying yes to God's love. So there's the ritual of baptism. He's dunked into the water. And then liminality, he goes out to the desert for 40 days in the wilderness. And it says he's tempted and he's accosted by the wild beasts in these 40 days in the wilderness. Interestingly, it's 40 years of crossing, of wandering in the desert. I think there's kind of an intentional connection there. And there's 4 months. I don't know what that means. Somebody here could probably tell me more about the numbers. 40 days in the wilderness, and that's what Lent is, 40 days. It's a 40-day season in the Christian calendar where you're kind of trying to go inside and do some self-introspection and try to root out the places of ourselves that need rooting out and pay really close attention to those places so that we can eventually reintegrate, get closer to God. So 40 days in the wilderness, and then he emerges and he preaches in his hometown. Preaches in hometown. He comes out and he basically declares himself to be a subversive rabbi on the edge of society, and they try to kill him right away. It's a great story. And it's the beginning of a new thing. We see this again in the end of his life, the end of J. We've got the crucifixion, where he is betrayed and separated from his followers and the world around him. And it's this Good Friday is this day of separation, disconnection. And then we have the entombment. So this is Good Friday in the church calendar. This is Holy Saturday, church calendar, where Jesus is put into the tomb. And some of the stories, it says he descended into hell. There's this idea that he is truly outside. He is in the liminal place. He's in the place of transition, the place of temptation, the place of like, I don't want to be here. And then, of course, what's the reintegration? Easter, the resurrection, where he comes back, but in a different way. I mean, we could cover a lot of whiteboards with this stuff. In mystical Christianity, there's a 3-part progression where first, phase 1 is where you're kind of tasting God for the first time, and it's like, woo, this is great. I love feeling good. I love feeling loved. I love feeling joy. I feel these emotions around this, and this is really wonderful. And then phase 2 is liminality. It's the dark night of the soul. It's this time when that kind of wears off, or it becomes stale, or it just doesn't feel like it did before, and you wonder, was that even real? And it's this phase that like all of the mystics describe as this dryness, this emptiness, this kind of like, where was that beauty and that fun of before? But it's called purgation by the mystics because we have to kind of purge the desire for the divine, that desire that comes simply from like satisfying our needs and our wants and our desires. It tastes so good. It's just like candy, and you just want more and more of it. And it has to go from that to a deeper place of kind of universal love and grace. And it's coming not from meeting your own kind of desires and needs, but coming from a delight in the wonder, the majesty of the world, of the Creator, and of the presence of God in everybody around you. But to get there, you have to go through that passage where your ego gets highlighted, and you see it in all of its messy glory. Mystics say that this is a cyclical process, so if you've been through the dark night of the soul, you're probably going to go through it again. I'm sorry. Been through it several times. It's a bummer. It's a bummer. Part 2 is a bummer. We don't like part 2. We go into part 2 kicking and screaming. I mean, the Egyptians say, were there no graves in Egypt for us to die in, Moses? I mean, somebody laughed. I love that. I think it's supposed to be funny. I think the writers are like, I mean, they're on the other side of the story, right? So they can kind of reflect on it and laugh. It was... they were in slavery, and yet here they are looking at the Red Sea with an army coming towards them. People do not like part 2. There are so many reasons why we don't like it. The fear of losing security, the fear of losing what we know for something that we don't know. There's the danger, I think that a lot of us have, that there's nothing on the other side. There's nothing actually good. If we get through the tunnel, then we're in Mordor, and that's actually not a good place to be. Or that the people there, if there's this idea of reintegration in our society, we're really bad at reintegration rituals. Like with divorce in our society, we have this, okay, you're married, there's this ritual, and then there's this ritual of kind of, you're in between things, but there's no kind of reintegration of people into a new identity and a new path. We don't have rituals for these things. There's so many different ways in our society that we lack the ability to help people find a new identity after they've been through something difficult. There are a lot of reasons that we fear part 2. One is that we think we aren't enough, that we don't have it in us to handle what is in that tunnel, what is in the wilderness, what is in the sea, what is in the tomb, what's in the place of death. We don't think that we've got it inside us, or we don't trust that we can get out. And yet it's necessary. There's this line in the gospel that Jesus says, no one can follow me, no one can live into the gospel unless they're willing to leave brother and sister and home and family and nation, and I'm paraphrasing, but unless they're willing to leave everything, they can't follow me. And you can read this as this kind of like really intense, almost cult-like leader, like you have to say no to everything you've ever known and just be with me and only listen to me. But I think it's much deeper. It's not that kind of literal kind of separate yourselves from your friends and family so that I'm the only voice you're hearing. I think what he's trying to say is that in order to choose something new, you have to let go very seriously of something on the other side. You can't go into the tunnel and stay out of the tunnel. You can't keep one foot in and kind of try to get to the other side. Eventually, you've got to put both feet into that place of transition and liminality. In order to pick something, you have to leave something. And so a question I have for you today is there something in your life that you feel like you need to be saying yes to, some place you need to be going, that you are afraid to go because of that tunnel, that transition, that middle place? You can't just go from place 1 to place 3. There is a time of purgation. There's a time of fear. There's a time of unknowing. Is there something in your life that you know you need to be going towards, but you're not ready to let go? The power of part 2 in a spiritual context, the power of transition in a spiritual context is knowing that we do not go there alone. We don't have to go into these places of mystery and chaos and fear by ourselves. We have, first of all, the people around you. If this is a community that you call home, we need that. It's very few people can go on this journey by themselves, even if they have a profound faith in God. We need people around us. We need family. We need people who understand the language we're using, who understand the trials we're facing, who understand the kind of mystery that we are casting ourselves into. Community, love, friendship, supporters, church. We've got each other, but we've got something even more profound, mystical, ancient than that. In this story, the Egyptians are standing looking at this sea, seeing the Pharaoh coming at them as fast as can be with chariots and horses and swords, bows and arrows. And Moses says, all you have to do is trust in God and be still. And then God says, why don't you tell him to go into the water? It's actually kind of an interesting story. Moses isn't entirely right there. The goal isn't just to be still. And Moses says, God will fight the battle for you. And God says, actually, you have to go into the water. As an interesting part of that story, like he calls him out a little bit. God doesn't fight our battles totally for us on our own. We actually do have to do something. And the Christianity that says that you don't have to do anything, you're saved, you're good, you're loved, so just chill. That is destructive, and it is certainly not connected to this story. But God doesn't just say go into the water alone. God appears in this cloud of flame and fire that swirls around. And it says the cloud was in the darkness, and it lit up the night. It lit up the night. In that place of fear, that tunnel, that wandering, that desert, that wilderness, that tomb, there is a cloud with us that lights up the night. Even in our most cold places, even in our most shadow places, there is a light there. You are never, ever alone. So during this month, we're going to be going deeper into this. And actually next week, we're going to have kind of an open mic time where we invite people to come forward and to share what is a transition part in your life that you have been through, that you're going through now. What are those part twos in that journey? What is the wisdom that you can share with others who are going through that if you've been through it? And what are the questions that you're asking if you're in the middle of it right now? I know so many of us, this is like a magnet for people in part two here at this church. Spiritually mostly, but in lots of different ways, which I think is incredibly powerful. There's so much power in the center in that tunnel. It's where we get rid of the ego. It's where we find God's voice in a much clearer way than we can in place 1 or 3. But we're also going to talk this month about how in our society we have created places that are permanent transitions. Part 2 is only okay if there's something on the other side. And we have entire people groups in our world, in our nation, that are stuck in part 2 and there's no way out. We have undocumented immigrants. There's no future for them. We came up with DACA, but now that's in jeopardy all the time. There are millions and millions of people who are under constant threat of staying permanently in this middle ground. And it's enough to make somebody. It's a horrible thing. It's a torturous thing to do to people to have them in that place. So immigrants, people who are undocumented, stateless people, people in refugee camps that have no hope of getting out, many people who are in our prisons, people who are chronically homeless, and there doesn't seem to be any pathway out of that. As well as in much of our society, people who are trans, people who are LGBT, folks who don't have a safe place, a sanctuary, on the other side in our general culture. Minority racial groups in our country have been in this state for centuries. Native Americans are on reservations. They're like permanent liminal spaces. People who are mixed race don't have here or there. There are people who are cast in because of the hierarchies of our society into permanent borderlands, and it is cruel, it is evil, it is wrong. We need to be doing something about it. So this month we're going to be exploring more of that as well. How we can go into part 2 in our own lives, but also help create a society that doesn't have a permanent place of transition. So as we continue in our service today, I'll leave you with this blessing. May you discover the courage within to face the tunnel. When you hear a yes, when you see something beautiful, when you know you are meant to reintegrate somewhere, may you have the courage, the joy, the trust to walk into that tunnel, walk into the desert, take a step on that water. May your faith not fail. Know that God is with you. Amen.
Hasta In oceans deep, my faith will stand, and I will call upon your name, and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, where I am yours, and you are mine. Your grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign hand will be my guide. Where feet may fail and fear surrounds me, you've never failed, and you won't start now. So I will call upon your name, and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours, and you are mine. Spirit, lead me. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters, wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of Creator. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters, wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of Creator. Great Spirit, wherever you are leading us, whatever uncharted territory, unknown waters that you are guiding us toward, please give us the eyes and the wisdom and the courage to follow after you in the way of life and freedom. And let us hold in our hearts this morning those that are on a journey. Maybe not just a spiritual one, but a physical one as well. Those that are wandering in and around and between borders this morning, looking for a place to plant roots, looking for a place to call home, looking for sanctuary. We hold them in our hearts. Spirit of God, that you would walk with those who are on their journey this morning. Walk with us, oh God. Be with us as we continue together this morning. We pray all these things in your many names. Amen.